Hey guys, we took our GT6 out for a drive yesterday and it started stumbling a bit while driving. And we got to a place to stop and the engine kept running, but when we lifted the bonnet to take a look underneath, there was fuel pouring out of the rear carburetor. So there's a few reasons that that could happen. One of them could be the fuel pump is putting out too much pressure and there's no regulator. Another one could be that there's nothing that's stopping the flow of fuel. So either the floats in the carburetor are bad or it's a bad needle valve, a piece of dirt got in there, a number of things like that. So let's take a look. I'll show you how to correct the problem. All right, for starters, you really can't fix anything with the air cleaner in the way, so you need to get that out. Fuel was coming out here, and if you've ever been inside one of the carburetors or if you've watched my rebuild series, there's a tube that comes out right about here inside the float bowl. It actually makes a sharp angle, comes out here. If you've got later Zenith-Stromberg carburetors, sometimes you've got another tube on the side with a valve, and all that valve is doing is it's directing the vent to be vented either to here, which goes to the air cleaner and right back down the throat of the carb, or out the brass tube, which will be on the side. That'll go to a charcoal canister. So anything after about 1973-ish should have that, maybe a little earlier, depends on the car. But earlier cars, this is a 67, it's only going to vent here. And so what's happening is fuel's pouring out of this hole, which means that there is too much pressure being built up inside. So either there is too much fuel pressure coming from the pump, in which case that should be affecting both carbs, you would think. So I don't think that's it, because this one's fine. Other than that, there is a needle valve on the inside, and then there's a set of floats. And those floats, when the fuel level gets up high enough, will float, obviously, as the name implies, and it will shut off that needle valve. So my guess is the needle valve has some gunk in it, which is preventing it from closing, and it's not able to shut off the flow of fuel. Now you can pull off, in fact probably should, pull off the entire carburetor, pull off the bottom, make sure that everything's set inside, but it's a pain, it's a bit of extra work. So you can actually do this while it's on the car. It's a little bit of a pain, but you can just take the float bowl off if you've got room. This is easier to do in a Spitfire or a GT6. It's going to be harder in a TR6 because, again, you're not going to be able to see as easily. But since we can do it, we're going to. It's worth a note, my engine's cold. Most likely, if it was just leaking fuel, your engine's not going to be cold. So just be careful because the exhaust is right there. You don't want to burn yourself. Okay, so a couple of things to be aware of. First of all, this is going to be full of fuel, so be prepared for a little bit of splash. And secondly, if it's been on there for a little while, it might stick to the gasket. Just get kind of a mallet. You can tap it a little bit just to loosen it. Once it is loose, you can gently wiggle it off. Ah, yes. Here's the problem. You can see as I kind of shake this around, you've got all the crud in it. One of those little bits probably got lodged in somewhere that it shouldn't have. You can see there's obviously gunk, so it's pretty clear to me that the needle valve was not able to close. So I'm going to take it out, just clean it out, obviously get rid of the crap that's in this carburetor. And if you haven't recently replaced your fuel filter, now is probably a good time. I just changed the fuel pump, so that's probably where some of this gunk came from. To float bowl off the carburetor, you're going to want to take the floats off. Careful not to lose any of the pieces. Give this a shake next to your ear. You want to make sure that there's no fuel inside of them. That will also cause problems. And then this little bit here is your float valve. So it doesn't seem like it's sticking, but we're going to take it out, clean it, and actually we'll probably just replace it. I can never seem to find a wrench that fits it. I believe it's stupidly kind of a Whitworth size. And so I always end up using an adjustable wrench, even though I hate these. It's generally not an appropriate tool for almost all of what we're doing. needle valve will come out, and then there's most likely a washer, which is stuck in there. So here's the needle valve, and the way that you can test it, if you're at home and you've pulled this out, just replace it. If you happen to be on the side of the road and you don't happen to have a spare, the needle should move easily. Basically just drop down with gravity and you push it back with your finger, and you can blow in this end. Make sure you wipe it off first because it's going to taste like gasoline, and press up the needle with your finger, and if you can no longer blow through it, then it's working okay. So you can take it out, you can just spray it down and clean it if you like, but again, if you're at home, these are not expensive. I usually recommend just throw it out, replace it. Okay, we've got our new needle valve. And hand tighten it into place. These things are, like I said, they're between sizes. It's not quite a half inch, it's bigger than that, but it's also not quite 9/16. Metric sizes aren't going to fit either, so technically it is a Whitworth size, I believe. So if you don't have a Whitworth wrench, you're kind of SOL. But fortunately, an adjustable will work just fine. As you are tightening down, it's probably not a bad idea to take a look with a mirror and make sure that the gasket is centered, because you need that to seal. And don't over tighten it. Remember, you're threading it into aluminum. And if you tighten it too much, then you're just going to strip the carburetor threads, and then you're going to be in a huge problem, especially if you're on the side of the road. Next, you'll want to put the floats back in, and make sure it's set this way. The bump part goes towards the top. Next step is adjustment. Normally, when you're building the carburetors, when you set this up, and gravity will hold these down because you've got the unit upside down. So since we don't have the benefit of gravity, you also don't want to push really hard on the ends of the floats, because if you do that, then it's not going to be an accurate measurement anyway. So here's the needle valve right here, and I find if you hold the tab against the needle valve, that's approximately where it needs to be anyway. So that's where gravity would set it. So you set a ruler. You don't need something as fancy as this, but 16 to 17 millimeters is what you're looking for. And you want to check from the carburetor body without a gasket to the floats. Should be 16 to 17 millimeters on both sides. Right, so you want to hold it up, take your measurement, and we need to adjust the tab. So to adjust the tab, that's pretty easy. You get a pair of pliers and you just bend this down slightly if you need it to be closer, and bend it up slightly if you need it to be farther away. Too much. That's about right on this side. And this side's actually a little bit low. So here you want to bend this bit. You want the float to be higher, but you don't want to change this side. That's about perfect. Again, make sure that you're holding on the metal part, because if you're holding on the floats, it's not going to be an accurate measurement. Ideally, again, you would have the carburetor off, but that's a pain in the butt. And this is a way that you can get it really, really close. Another point of leaking on these is that O-ring you see right here. It just dries out, gets brittle, and so you may have to replace that. Keep an eye, if it's leaking out at the bottom of the carburetor, not out of the vent, then it may not be a fuel pump issue, or it may not be a fuel pressure issue. It could just be that this O-ring is gone, and that's also pretty common. Even easier repair, you take out the float bowl, replace the O-ring, put the float bowl back in, you're good to go. All right, we're going to wipe out the float bowl and put that back. Fit a new gasket, or at least make sure the one that's on there doesn't have tears. Okay, we're back together. So now I'm going to describe what we're going to do, and then you're going to watch me do it. Since we've taken something apart, we might have changed the mixture. So we're going to start the engine. First of all, look to see if it's leaking, but then we need to make sure that the carbs didn't go out of sync. So I'm going to put a flow meter on both carbs, and we're going to compare the readings, make sure that they're both drawing in the same amount of air, and then we're going to very slightly lift the piston, the air piston, inside each of the carburetors, and we're going to listen to what the engine does. If it speeds up, then that means that more air is beneficial in helping the engine run better. More air means that you're currently getting too much fuel, or it's running rich. If the engine slows down, that means you've already got too much air, you're letting in even more, and so you need to enrich the mixture in the carburetors. And if it slows down or speeds up slightly and then kind of goes back and hovers about where it was, then you're looking at a carburetor that's reasonably well adjusted. And I mean, if you wanted to, you can get an exhaust gas analyzer and get it perfect. I know people use O2 sensors. You don't really need that. You can get it good enough where you're not going to notice a huge difference. You can get it pretty close. So let's start up the engine and do that. And then also a note, some carburetors adjust through the top. If you've got later Zenith-Stromberg carburetors, you need to take out the damper from the top, and there's a special tool. SUs and these older Zenith-Strombergs adjust using this nut at the bottom, and you will twist that, and that is raising and lowering the jet. If it goes through the top, you're raising and lowering the needle. Same thing, what you're looking for is the relation of the needle to the jet. So if you're raising the needle, that is the same thing as lowering the jet. It's still at the same point. And so two different ways of accomplishing the same thing, but in this case, we're adjusting it from the bottom. That'll be similar to SUs. So let's get that done. Okay, so first things first, you want to kind of see where we're at. About a 12, this one's about a 16, so they're not even. We're not sure if they were even before, actually. So they're not even, so what we're going to need to do is loosen the linkage, because we're going to have to set these carburetors up. You can get away with loosening it just on one side, but I like to do both anyway. And what you're looking for is the carburetors to be able to move independently from each other. See, so I was adjusting the throttle on this side, but it didn't really move this end. So that's good. You want the linkages to be just loose enough so that when you move the throttle on one, it's not going to move the other. That's important, because what we're doing is we're adjusting these screws to change the flow, and that's what's going to adjust the idle speed on each carburetor. You get the idle speed correct with the choke off, by the way. You get the idle speed correct, and then it should be correct throughout the entire rev range. This one's running a little too fast, and this one's not fast enough. And throughout this whole process, keep an eye on your RPMs. With the GT6, I want to say it's around 700 RPMs is what we're shooting for. Somewhere between there and about 800 or 900 is probably okay in that range, depending on how warm the engine is. Make sure the engine's warm, make sure the choke's off. But if your idle is too fast, then whichever carburetor has a higher reading, you want to unscrew the throttle screw. If your RPMs are too low, then you want to screw in, open the throttle on whichever carb is weaker. So that's how you adjust to make sure that they're synchronized. Warmer. Okay, and what you've seen me doing after I adjust the screw, you see me kind of pushing down on the end of the throttle. That's just to make sure that it's not sticking. About 13. About 14. Let's check our RPM. We're idling a little bit fast, so we're going to take a little bit more off of this. And you want to adjust it in small increments. An eighth of a turn is plenty. Okay. Now the carburetors are synchronized. Now we're looking to see whether or not they are adjusted properly for mixture. You want to stick something down the mouth, raise it slightly. So this is too lean. And then over here, also too lean. So with SUs and early Strombergs like these, what we want to do is lower the jet. You lower the jet and you enrich in the mixture. If you have the later Stromberg carburetors, you're raising the needle. And so if you raise the needle, you're making it more rich. Because you're separating the needle and the jet is kind of what you're doing. So whichever one you're adjusting, separate the needle and the jet to make it more rich. Put the needle and the jet closer together to make it more lean. And you want to go one flat at a time. And then test again to see where you're at. Didn't stumble as much, we're getting warmer. That's more like it. Check your RPM. We're a little bit fast, but I'm going to guess that this hasn't gone out of adjustment. So if you're going to lower the RPM and it's adjusted, lower it by an even amount. you're happy with your RPM, then you want to kind of reset the throttle. And I like to rotate the linkage so that it's about to move it down, and then give it a little bit of clearance back in the other direction. Tighten down the bolts that you've loosened. Make sure that both throttles move. Double check your measurements again. And you're ready to bolt it back together and go driving. Well guys, we're all done. That's pretty much it. Simple fix, but it's a common problem. So just keep an eye out. If you see fuel dumping out, it's either too much fuel pressure, or it could be something that's not able to hold up against that fuel pressure. And if that's the case, then you're looking at either a bad float, bad needle valve, could be a bad seal. The needle valve has, again, we put in that fiber washer. Fiber washer could have a leak. So there's a few things that it could be, but basically you're looking at too much pressure. You just need to find a way to stop that so that it's not leaking back out. So that's pretty much it. I hope this was helpful. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and if you have, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. Thanks guys, see you next time.